From the News Channel 5 Network, this is OpenLine.
Good evening and welcome to OpenLine tonight. I am glad you are joining us. I'm Carrie Sharp, and tonight's topic is something that is impacting all of us, no matter if you consider yourself rich or poor or somewhere in between, no matter what part of the mid-state you live in. We are all dealing with inflation right now, and it is hitting everybody in the pocketbook every time you pull up to the gas pump or go to the grocery store or open your electric bill. It's kind of sticker shock, isn't it? So we have an expert to walk us through what is happening and really what we can expect over the next 10 months or so here in 2022. Let me introduce you to our expert tonight, and I hope you'll have some questions to call in. I'll remind you that the number is here on the bottom of your screen, 615-737+. We are also streaming on Facebook, so if you have questions, type those up and we'll get those answered as well. In the meantime, Dr. Hannah Stolze, let me introduce you to her. She is joining us, an associate professor over at Lipscomb University. Thank you, Dr. Stolze, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here with you.
It is great to have you on. And as I was reading through your bio, you have a wide variety of education and interest and service in the Army as well. I'm going to let you give us kind of your background a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started out, as you said, I was enlisted in the U.S. Army, and I did an undergraduate degree in international political economics and Mandarin. So you can imagine, started off really thinking about global supply chain before we really knew what supply chain degrees were. Went on to do an MBA and work in global buying, and realized I loved writing and research, and so ended up getting a doctorate in logistics and marketing from the University of Tennessee, which has propelled me to where I am today as a supply chain professor. And I'm the director of a new center at Lipscomb, which is the Center for Transformative Sales and Supply Chain Leadership.
You mentioned that it's new, and we are seeing these degrees pop up not only at Lipscomb, but other universities as well, particularly when it comes to the supply chain. And of course, that phrase has been in the news so very much over the last 2 years. Are we seeing those studies pop up because of what is happening right now?
Certainly, and I think companies have realized that supply chain is of strategic importance, definitely over the last decade. COVID and the bottlenecks have made us all aware of how dependent we are on the supply chain, definitely over the last 2 years. So we have way more awareness of supply chain than anyone had 10 years ago when I started on this journey.
Oh, for sure. Something also in the news that we can't escape and just in everyday life right now is inflation. It is at its highest level in the past 40 years, and it's impacting every single one of us in many of the same ways. We don't usually get that across the spectrum, and it usually is happening, something is happening to a certain segment of the population. This is impacting anybody who has to buy goods. So I want to make sure we start this conversation about inflation on the same page. I'm going to ask you to put on that professor hat. Let's talk about what inflation is.
Yeah, absolutely. So inflation at its most simple term, right, is just that the price of your shopping cart has gone up. So the price of each of the goods that you're buying at a grocery store, the price tag, the sticker price is going up on the goods you buy every day. So in maybe more academic definition, inflation is a loss of purchasing power. So we have less power, we have less ability to buy stuff over time. So that means our dollar doesn't go as far tomorrow as it did today, and certainly not as far as it did yesterday.
Yeah, and everybody can feel that. They know exactly what that is when they look at their budget for the month and say, oh my goodness, my grocery bill is just skyrocketed over what it was a month ago or a year ago. I said that we've reached our highest point in 40 years. Inflation year to year is up, I think, 7%. Yeah.
Yeah, it's 7.5 over the last 12 months. Yeah.
Oh. It makes you nervous. And I know that different segments like meat, I think, has gone up like 15%, but dairy has gone up less than that. So really that 7.5 is an average. Is that correct?
That's correct. And adjusted for seasonality too.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I guess the real question is, what's causing it?
Yeah, so everybody has a slightly different idea about this, right? It kind of depends on, how you feel about different policies and some of the different things that have happened over the last year. Certainly the instigator, the start of all of this was COVID and the pandemic. We saw that really the shutdowns created shortages. And that's kind of the starting point, right? Whenever, if you remember, I don't know if you took a microeconomics class, maybe you remember. If you didn't, it basically just means if there's less products available, if there's less milk available, there's less oil available, it gets more expensive to get it.
Yes.
And so if there's a shortage, if there's not bread on the shelf or water, or like we saw with masks, right? When it becomes harder to get and there's less of it available, it automatically pushes the price up. And so because of COVID, because of the shortages, we saw that there was a shortage of a lot of different products, and that created a slowdown in terms of supply. Now, what was unusual in the last 2 years is that not only did we have a shortage of supply, but with the shutdowns in early 2020, people were hanging out at home. And they weren't spending money on going to Disney or, going out for dinner. And so it meant that actually people saved more money in Q1 and Q2 of 2020 than probably a lot of people had for a while. And then stimulus checks came. So now people have been stuck at home and haven't been able to spend, they're buying their masks and their groceries maybe, but it's definitely cut back spending. So now all of a sudden we have this flood of cash, and then with restaurants, they've come back really slowly, right? Like right. If you've been out to eat, it's staff shortages and all of these things. And so we haven't bounced back all the way with travel and eating out and all of those things. So people are buying more goods. And the consumer price index is based on the price of goods. And we don't have as many goods available, and we have more money to buy them. So that's like the perfect recipe for prices to inflate.
And I have a lot of questions for the in-between. It sounds like when you explain this, that this perhaps could be a very cyclical trend. Is when we look over history, is that what happens with inflation?
Yes, absolutely. So inflation is a normal part of the economic business cycle. So we see like economic cycles go in circles, right? We had like the Great Depression of the 30s, and then we saw like a little recession in the 70s, and then another recession in 2008. And then, we were expecting, and we've had a lot of years of economic prosperity and growth, right? And so, there's always anticipation that there's going to be like, that bubble will burst eventually. And so inflation is part of that economic cycle that's normal. It's just how we get out of it that shifts over history.
And that's the main question we got to get to tonight, is how do we get out of this? But I do want to, we had James on the phone, but he hung up. So James, if you want to call back, I'll get to you a little more quickly this time. We appreciate folks who call in and just add to the conversation. The number is at the bottom of the screen, 615-737+. Love to hear how this is impacting you. If you have lived through one of these cycles before, or if you have questions for Dr. Stolze, now is the time to ask. You mentioned the stimulus checks, and a lot of people, like with any topic right now, want to blame inflation on politics and politicians and even who's sitting in the White House. Is that fair? Do we see any correlation?
Well, I think maybe we could find some correlation, but maybe not causation. So who caused inflation? I'm not quite sure, right? It definitely was the perfect storm. So the government policies, the stimulus checks, definitely pushed a bunch of cash into the market, and there wasn't the supply of products to meet that new cash supply and the demand. So it is a perfect storm. I think that depending on who you listen to, a lot of people are blaming the global supply chain, are blaming shortages, and are really hoping that moving out of, COVID and out of the pandemic will help us, help the economy to kind of self-correct. And so, I think it's definitely probably a mix. I don't know if we can find one culprit, if it's just policy or the shortages or the port blockages or, things like bridges between the U.S. and Canada, shutting down auto plants. Yeah, so
it really is a perfect storm. It's all of this coming together over the past 2 years, and 2 years seems like a long time, but I guess when you look at supply chains and companies and how they have weathered all of this, the impact kind of spreads out over a long time. Is that a fair way of looking at it?
Yeah, absolutely. And we also came into the pandemic, into COVID, wages have been kind of flat for a long time as well. And so, that wages chasing price inflations, that kind of cycle gets talked about a lot by economists. When prices go up, do companies pay their workers more? And so we're starting to see wages go up. It'll be interesting to see if, kind of coming out of the pandemic and the supply chain catching back up, this month is a really exciting month for the supply chain to catch back up because of Chinese New Year. So because business will slow down in China, because everybody stops to celebrate like our U.S. Christmas, it might give our ports a little time to catch back up, which means that we might be able to unload some of those ships that are sitting outside of Los Angeles, out of Long Beach, and this could help kind of move product back to our shelves, at least more consistently than in the last 2 years. So I tend to be optimistic, and so I think that there's opportunity with prices going up, demand could slow. With Chinese New Year, we could get product flow going again, and we'll see what happens. Quarter 2 and 3 are going to be exciting this year.
So how quickly could we see relief, though? Let's say we do get that product moving again. How quickly does that translate to prices on the shelf?
Yeah, 2 things have to happen. We need products on the shelf, and we need to see a demand or shopping slowdown in the U.S. as well. Okay. So as people start buying a little bit less and products becomes more available, then it allows prices to level out again.
Very interesting. We have Ricky on the phone. Let's go to him before we have to go to break. Ricky, you're the first caller tonight. Go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Thank y'all for having me tonight.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. With the inflation, I think COVID's got a lot to do with it. It had a lot to do with it. It's going to happen, but I do hold this administration accountable for there's a lot more than they need to do or should have done and had things in plan. But as far as our truck drivers, I think that's going to run a lot of bills up. And God bless our truck drivers. A lot of people think they're second-class citizens or first-class citizens, because I used to be a truck driver and I've been on the road.
Yeah.
And I know how it is. But I just wish people would really appreciate the truck drivers and, pray for them.
Yeah.
And that's all I got to say. I pray for y'all and thank y'all. Y'all have a good night.
Ricky, thank you for calling in. We appreciate you watching tonight. You take care. And let's talk about that truck driver. It's kind of a standoff right now. They are shutting down many of the ports and crossings at the border between Canada and the U.S. And it's really become a state of emergency. What impact could this have?
Yeah, for sure. Truck drivers, we've had a shortage in truck drivers for the last decade. And so with the Great Resignation and people, pulling out of the workforce over the last 2 years, it's made it even more challenging. So companies are competing to get drivers on the road. And, I know in my short time in the Army, I got to drive a couple trucks here and there. And, it is a really essential, important job. We need products to be able to move across our highways to get to our stores and through our warehouses. Fortunately, I think the bridge between Detroit and Windsor is opening back up. But even that 1 day or 2 days or 3 days of shutdown for those factories, it creates, a ripple effect. So it doesn't just affect the factory, it affects the tire manufacturer whose shipments are needing to come. It affects, the steel and chassis. Maybe we should do a quiz on car parts, but
right.
It affects everybody in the whole supply chain of the cars that then has to catch back up. So I totally agree with Ricky. Like truck drivers are essential to our economy, and we have to be able to move products into the stores in order for shortages to go away as well.
Yeah. All right, we're gonna have to take another quick break. When we come back, hopefully more of your calls and questions, 615-737+, and more questions about inflation. Stay with us.